Hello and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and today we are talking about families in Supernatural that work and that don't work, or maybe don't work quite the way they're supposed to, but we're going to get to the bottom of it. But before we start, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Lynn.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University, and one of my research areas is the psychology of fandom. I've especially studied a lot of the supernatural fandom and written 6 books on the show. The 2 most recent are There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, which was written with the actors and fans of the show about what the show's legacy will be, and Family Don't End with Blood. It's pretty cover also, which has chapters by the actors and the fans about how the show has actually changed lives.
Great. Travis?
Hey, my name is Travis Adams. I am a social worker with the VA in San Diego. I specialize in working with veterans and active duty service members with PTSD. And I contribute to a lot of different books similar to Lynn with like the pop culture psychology. And I've done 2 books with Supernatural.
Great. Susan?
I'm Susan Nylander, and I'm a professor of English at Barstow College, a little college out in the desert, little oasis off Highway 66, Route 66. So there's a nice little tie-in. I, along with my writing partner, Mandy Taylor, wrote and edited a collection called Death in Supernatural, Critical Essays. We are also, and I hope I have a chance to mention this again, we also have a call for papers out there for Women in Supernatural, Critical Essays. That is our next venture for Mandy and I. And we are looking at all things pertaining to women, because that's not a problem in Supernatural, right? So I'm looking forward to this conversation today about family.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I'm fortunate to have been able to write a chapter for There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook, and I'm a staff columnist for the Winchester Family Business. So when I fell down the rabbit hole, I fell hard and kept on going. So let's talk about, family structure and dynamics sounds very academic until you throw in vampires and werewolves and some of the other things we see in Supernatural. So let's start with talking about vampires. Those nests, they're kind of like found family in the extreme. Find someone, like them, bite them, keep them forever. What does that do to the dynamics in a nest? We haven't necessarily seen real functional folks here. Lynn?
So interesting. Supernatural does a really good job of never making anything just black and white, which we've talked about in some of these panels before. But that's certainly true when it comes to the way it portrays vampire families, because I can think of a number of episodes where, even though the vampires are clearly the bad guys and I'm not rooting for them, nevertheless, I have some empathy for them. They are very tight knit. The nests are very tight knit family groups. The first vampires that they meet, there's a super strong relationship between the male vampire and the female vampire. I mean, they clearly have an emotional bond. And while they're trying to make other family members in a way that is not good for those other hapless people, so I'm not saying that it's a moral way of doing things. Nevertheless, they do have, I think the show sets it up for us to feel some empathy for them. There's also the episode Alex, Annie, Alexis, Anne is another example of, again, the vampires are the bad guys, but Alex, that was sort of her found family also, and she has very conflicted feelings about especially the female vampire who was like a mother figure to her. And once again, while you know where you're supposed to be rooting, and I think you do, I felt bad for some of those vampires because I think as humans we can relate to the way their bonds were portrayed. And I love that the show doesn't make it too easy, doesn't make, the bad guys so black and white that we're just like, yeah, kill that mother figure. You feel a twinge, you feel like a little ambivalent about it.
Okay, Travis?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going with what Lynn was talking about, I think that even when Dean got turned early in the series to a vampire, and then they're able to cure him because Dean will never fully die, right? Like he's always getting brought back until the end, pretty much, and then who knows? But then later on, when you get to meet the Alpha, and he knows about Dean because of that connection that they have, it's like I know where all my children are. I know who all of them are. So that again goes with like the different depth of family in the vampire household, right? You have one person that oversees everything and it's in a part of everybody. And you even have actual brothers on the show who are vampires together too, like out in the woods, and they're only killing animals. And then one brother starts to stray and the other one doesn't agree with it. And then they have conflict, just like real families. Sometimes our siblings don't act in the way that we believe they could or should act. We have these unattainable goals for our siblings sometimes. And that's like thinking about that dynamic between those two brothers. I can't remember the episode right now, the name of it, but thinking about those two brothers and thinking about me and my sister and how I hold her to a higher expectation, even though I've never really vocalized that before until more so recently. And so that we can get through conflict together through communication. But instead he's like, he's never going to change. I'm just going to kill him.
Susan?
Yeah, Travis, that was the episode that we found out that Lilith was back. That was just a recent episode, in season 15. Anyway, yeah, I think that one of the things that got me thinking when Lynn was talking about family and Travis was talking about these bonds, when we look at vampires, traditionally these people who walk through the night, and some are these lone individuals, but they live supposedly forever. And so to not have anyone for that forever time has got to be, well, it drove the one guy crazy, and he went out in the Twihard episode where he went out and was trying to recreate the family that had been killed. And so he had these young women thrown out, and roofied them with some vampire blood, turns them into this creature that they didn't even, there was no consent. There's all kinds of really problematic issues in that sense. But when he's talking to Gordon, before he actually turns Gordon, he's trying to explain why, his family's gone. And so this grief that he's going through, and this idea of needing to create a family, because the idea of walking through solitary forever is just not sustainable. And I think I felt bad for him, even though he's out turning these poor young women who have no idea what's happening to them. And then once we find out about purgatory, that really makes it worse, when they're turned against their will or without consent. So, but this idea that you have to have a family and you have to make your family is, I think, a really important part of the vampire lore, that with otherwise walking through forever by yourself, I can't imagine how lonely that would be.
Well, the flip side, of course. Go ahead, Lynn. What were you saying?
Oh, sorry. I just from what Susan said, like that's just such a theme of the whole show. You just see it play out everywhere, that nobody wants to or can really go through life alone. You see it in the importance of Sam to Dean. You see it in all of the found family that has been created in the show. I mean, You see it with Benny when he's a vampire. He still has so much love for his niece
Right.
and wants to, protect her. The monsters are oftentimes very humanized, and I think we can relate to these universal themes that we see played out with them too. Sorry, Gail.
No, I think bringing up Benny is a great point there, because he kind of proved that you can't go home again no matter how much you want to. He tried to go back to his hometown and his family, and even with his niece understanding what he was and accepting him, it was hard for him to go back and try to recreate that, although the pull was very hard. And I think the other thing that kind of struck me as people were talking was you also had that flash in The Trap, the episode where Chuck shows Sam what he says the future is going to be, and we see Sam and Dean as vampires. And, you just come up with all kinds of how did they end up that way, but one of them got turned irrevocably and the other followed. No matter who went first, they just weren't going to leave each other, certainly not forever. And so there you have the same thing playing out with Sam and Dean as vampires. The other thing is, the alpha, what Travis said about the alpha knowing where all his children were, in some ways the alpha was a more caring father figure than Chuck in that sense, because he knew and it bothered him. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I also think it strikes me as we're talking about these individual examples that another thing that the show did that really helped everything be shades of gray is the actors that it cast in some of these pivotal roles were some of the best actors on the show. Ty Olsson, Rick Worthy. I mean, you couldn't not, they brought so much depth to those characters because they're such good actors. So yeah, I think the Alpha Vamp was actually a pretty sympathetic character. I was, I know Rick Worthy in his chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done writes about how much he loved the scene where Sam shoots him. And it is a brilliant scene, but I was kind of sad. I thought that they had insinuated that the Alpha Vamp was going to be back next season, and maybe that there was some potential for him to be an ally with the boys. I mean, he seemed to understand them and respect them, even though he wasn't on their side. So I was disappointed by that, but that was a great character. And you do see, he, in some ways, he has the same value as Sam and Dean. Family is of utmost importance. The Alpha Vamp agreed with Sam and Dean on that. And I think that would have been really interesting.
Well, I think the Alpha Vamp may have picked up a teaching gig right about then over at that other show.
And that was a good show too, so I won't complain too much, but.
Well, go ahead, Susan.
Well, I was just thinking the episode where they discover the young woman that he'd been keeping as her, his blood bag. And there was genuine affection between them, and she ends up, not turning on him and actually turn on Sam and Dean to protect the Alpha, in that sense. So he has engendered some kind of connection, some kind of family, because he took her so young. And that's, again, another problematic part of that episode, especially with the children involved. And as Sam and Dean have such disdain for him, but he is willing to give them the blood they need to take out Dick Roman. So again, so much of that walking that fine line between good and not good happens a lot on the show.
Well, and we also saw with Alexis Annie, I always mangle that title. She was helping her vampire family hunt. And then her newfound family with Jody, she's still hunting, but in a different role. And so it's kind of interesting how she fits into that new family that is similar but different. Any thoughts on that? because you've got a big motherhood issue there between, you know, the vamp mom and Jody and family expectations and what you do for your siblings. And there's just a lot to unpack
And
there.
all that comes back to get her too, you know, her role as the trap in a way, you know, when the guy was trying to help her and she feeds him to her family, her brothers, and then he comes back for revenge later. So that does come back. She has to live with the guilt of all those years where she was, you know, the trap, so to speak. She was the bait. And that she never got past that, I don't think, very much.
I don't know though, at least what we were shown, and maybe this was not all their kills, but she was picking up some sleaze bags there and maybe doing the world a favor by getting rid of those kinds of guys, if those were all that she lured into the trap.
Some, but it seems like that one guy who, because he ended up killing his wife and his child because of that. So
Yeah.
you know, they didn't actually take him out. And so again, there's not, you know, I think Lynn and we've all kind of pointed to the fact that, yeah, there are no easy, you know, there's no black and white. It's all a bunch of gray in this show. And I think it really makes us question some of those assumptions we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it allows you to, sorry, Gail. I think it allows you to relate in such a deeper way, right? Which is why we all love the show and why there are so many episodes and why after, you know, it's been over for over a year, we still talk about it once a month. You know, why we still get together, because of it makes you feel connected, right? It makes you feel real because life isn't black or white. And with a lot of my clients, that's what the hardest part is getting them to understand that, hey, there's a lot of gray in the world. And your right might not be my right sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Now, we talked a little bit about the alpha vamp, but we saw some other people who were doing their best to lead their vampire family. You had Lenore, you had Boris, and you had Luther. We saw some very different parenting or leadership styles there. Any thoughts on that, or how it may have differed between a female leader and two male leaders? Because Lenore was trying very hard to keep her people out of trouble. That was her big thing. We're going to survive, and we're not going to kill people.
Right. She was trying to keep them on the straight path. You know, with Eli and Eli's teeth. I always think of Sam saying he couldn't think beyond Eli's teeth. But she was trying to keep them from eating people. And, you know, but Gordon never saw that. And I think that's also the episode where Dean really comes to terms with the fact that it's not all black and white for him, because he had always, I hate them, I want to kill them, they deserve to die, they're monsters. And it was Sam who was trying to live in that gray space and help Dean with that. But yeah, I think Lenore was the first time that Dean had that epiphany about monsters, maybe not being all one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
What about like comparing the different vampire like leaders of Ness? It's interesting because Boris and Luther, I mean, we don't get to know them nearly as well as we get to know Lenore, but both of them, I get the feeling, bought into, okay, we're vampires, this is what we are, it's perfectly okay. They weren't really questioning so much the morality of what they were doing. They were pretty much immersed in, this is what our family does, you know, which is parallel to many human families. This is what our family does. We're not going to question it. We're not going to think outside of the box. We're just going to do what our family does. And Lenore is a great analogy for reality when, you know, you can question, is this really the right way to do something? Yes, this is how our family does things, but is it the only way to do things? Is it the right way to do things? So she's a great character in showing that propensity that humans have to question ourselves and to keep interrogating ourselves and to grow morally and ethically and not have to stay completely in the lane that you were raised in. So I like that we got to, I'm only in Supernatural would you learn a lesson like that through a vampire. Like, how wonderful is that? I love this show. That's awesome.
And remember the sheriff that was trying to break away from that family. He actually had created the family. Then he tried to get away, and the hippie daughter, you know, I can't remember the episode title at the moment, but Hibbing 911 might be that one, where you know, that's where Donna is introduced to the hunting family, but he was trying to break away, even though he's the one that started that family, and they were trying to pull him back in by any means possible. So that was another thing too, is that sometimes family doesn't let you go. You know, and that can be bad.
That feels very relevant in the current socio-political climate.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think what Lynn was saying with what would it be like if she wasn't in charge, right? Like with her, the way that Lenore looked at things and saw after things, and had she acted like any other vampire that was running a nest, what that would do to her and her character, and how like the turmoil that may cause because of those moral conflicts. You know, there's a lot of people who get forced to do things in life that they don't agree with, and then that leaves a mark on them.
Mhm.
You know, similar to the mark of Cain, right? Like these things change you, and kind of it gets easier and easier to do it, and then it eats you up inside, and you have those dreams, you have those nightmares, you have those conflicts. So exactly being able to see these lessons that are taught through vampire nests and families, and what that looks like, and seeing Dean and Sam's reaction and how that changes based on how they handle things.
I think it's interesting. You've got Lenore, who is kind of trying to be the holistic mother and keep her people healthy and on a straight and narrow. Then you've got the mother in Alexis Ann, who really just goes down that path, as Lynn was saying. This is what we do. This is who we are. And the same is true with kind of Luther and Boris. Boris is kind of the skeevy hippie guru who, it's all a big party. I'm the big man, but you guys can all just, hey, free love and just go do what you want. And then there's Luther, who's much more of the authoritarian. This is the family, and this is the way it's going to be. So it's interesting to see vampire sires who have such different parenting approaches, and how it worked or didn't for their nests.
You can kind of compare that to the Winchesters too. You know, you have Sam and Dean eventually, you know, Dean at first being the, I follow what John says, I do what John says, we don't question. He's like our drill sergeant and our dad at the same time. And then over the course of the show, finding their own paths and being able to diverge from some of the things that their father taught them, you know, thinking for themselves. In a sense, they follow a similar path as Lenore in finding their own moral compass and their own idea of right and wrong, and not just swallowing it whole from their dad.
Yeah, using their experiences to make different choices, right? Even when they learn about the men of letters versus hunting, and then kind of combining the two into what works for them.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Meg too, when she says, talking about a cause, these things change over time, we learn, we grow. You know, she's bringing this idea of moving away from what had been, and it's interesting that these supposed evil creatures do have the ability to learn, to grow, to change, and again, if you're a vampire and you're trying to do that and move away from that, it's those tentacles are kind of, you know, embedded. They keep trying to drag you back in, and I think, you know, Travis, that's a absolutely important real world thing that happens with our friends or our family who don't like it sometimes when we find a new path and we want to grow and develop into something different, and often they don't want to let us do that.
Yeah, like with Gordon, right? Like they start to move a little bit, and then Gordon's like, "No, we're going to kill everybody, including you."
Yeah.
Or like those other three when they see Sam, um, after he kind of quits and he's working at the bar. I can't remember the episode name, but how they're like, "We're coming after you now too."
Right.
So there's a lot of episodes where the boys, the brothers, start to act differently and go against the grain of what a hunter should be, right? Those should statements again, and what they want to be. You know, when I work with people, I talk about, hey, you know what? Just because somebody's good in your life today doesn't mean they're going to be good in your life tomorrow. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to grow. And you might meet them again in a week and everything will be good again. And that's okay. That's part of life.
Great point.
Such an important thing to remember too, that when we do change in the real world, us as humans, it could be a good positive change, something that's good for us, but it doesn't mean it's going to be embraced by the rest of the people in our lives. I mean, that I had never thought about it this way before, but that scene that you mentioned where, you know, Sam is out of the life and he's not addicted to demon blood anymore, and those hunters come and they literally try to force demon blood down his throat to bring him back to what they want him to be doing. That's a great metaphor for what it feels like sometimes when you try to make a positive change in your life, and all the people who knew you when you were different, they don't all stand up and go, "Oh, yay, I'm so glad you've changed and outgrown us." Instead, they try to put pressure on, sometimes very painfully, to pull people back. So I think that's a really important lesson.
Yeah. A real life example I use with my clients is when I was in the Marine Corps, we dealt with everything by drinking. And that was totally acceptable. The Marine Corps was born in Tun Tavern. We're alcoholics then. We're going to be alcoholics now, and that's okay. But when I wanted to be sober, like my friends want to go to bar, hey, that's not the life I want to live anymore. And I'm allowed to change that. That means I have to cut you out the night they cut you out, because I need to value myself above anybody else.
Well, I want to talk about werewolf packs, but I want to slip in something else just so we have time to talk about it and it doesn't get lost, because even though it only showed up in one episode, that episode to me was surprisingly poignant. And that was the Muska, the fly creature in the episode with Sam and AU Charlie. And I'm still not convinced anybody could look like that at a bus stop, even in New York City in the middle of the night, and not have anybody wonder, why is your head so big? But I'll give it a pass. But that episode took this twist in the end, where the outcast, the one who had left the family or the hive, they came back and brought his body back. And I'm sitting there crying for this fly person because in the end, the bond wasn't as broken as maybe either side believed it to be. Any comments on that? Any thoughts about that?
I think it shows again how groups will, I don't know, how you treat your dead, how you treat your children, how you treat your elderly, says a lot about a culture. And so, if we're just looking at that as the fly people as alien culture, there's still something in there that we can relate to, as far as humanity goes. And care for the dead is huge. That's a huge part of any civilized culture, is how we protect the dead, how we care for them, how we send them off. There's huge numbers of traditions and rituals and all the things that we've developed socially in order to do that, to care for the dead. I think maybe says something right there.
But that it made a really good point about, oftentimes when people or creatures or whatever seem very different from us, we tend to dehumanize them and depersonalize them and assume that they don't have the same feelings that we do, and so we can treat them badly. I mean, that's really the root of so much prejudice and stigma and really bad treatment of people to other people. But I thought that was a great analogy for that, because they made those aliens look like something that we have an almost instinctive revulsion for, right? They look like flies. We think of flies as dirty and like brainless and, so the fact that that threw us that really effective curveball at the end, that it made me literally stop and be like, oh, wait a minute. Did I completely misjudge this race of species? I did. I completely misjudged them. Look at the tenderness, look at the caring. Just because they looked like that and they seemed like that, I judged them wrongly. And I remember I did cry also, Gail. And then I remember thinking, how is this show getting me to actually feel this much about a fly head when it changed in like the last 30 seconds? But that's how well done that was. We saw so much emotion that we could relate to, that it was this like, oh, wait a minute, I've misjudged this completely. But I love that lesson. That's a powerful lesson.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought that even though he had been apart from them, there was some sort of reproche made, some sort of he was still part of them in a way that mattered to them, and I thought that was powerful.
Yeah.
So on to the werewolves. We've seen a bunch of different packs. We saw Bessa's family's pack. We saw how Garth was doing things with his family. But we've seen other werewolves and creatures like them throughout the show. What do we learn about family from werewolves? Travis?
When I was thinking about Garth's family with like the Myers and what that looked like, it reminded me with what we're talking about with the vampires, how there's some that they want to go outside the norm of eating people's hearts, right? They're like, no, we'll get animals or we'll do these other things. And then even within that dynamic, the mom or the stepmom was like, no, like my family is going to rise again. We're going to come back and we're going to be the true werewolf that we're supposed to be. So it reflects a lot of ways in the vampire discussion we were just having, because there are those who don't want to live the life that they were kind of bred into. And I mean, they even wear the silver bullet just to kind of feel the pain, right? Or cross, is it a cross?
Bullet.
Bullet, yeah, it was bullet, right? Wearing the bullets as a reminder that they are vulnerable, and that helps keep people grounded too, or in this case, werewolves grounded.
There's so many themes in that particular episode, Travis, too, with the idea of, the whole Ragnarok, she's going to bring their culture. She's this pure culture, of werewolves. They're born, they're not bitten. And so this idea that this hierarchy, you could really go into a whole, subtextual thing going on about racism and all of that as well. But then there's like the sisters, who just because, I'm going to get her name wrong. I was thinking Kate. Is it Kate? Okay, good. Okay. I'm not quite as memory lost as I thought. Or Kate thinks that her sister is going to be okay because she's okay. She thinks her sister will be able to live the vegetarian way or whatever, the non-human, but she can't and won't. And so again, it gets back to that idea of just because this is working for me doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for the other sister. And that becomes very problematic when it puts both of them in danger of, on the hunter's radar or whatever. So I think that's, again, not every family is going to agree to live the same way.
I think the show did a smart thing by taking a character who was already a beloved character in the show, who we felt like we knew and related to in Garth, and making him be a werewolf. It's a little different than any of the other characters that we've talked about, because we met them as they were already vampires or whatever they were. But Garth, we already knew as a human and already loved him. So that was maybe even more powerful a lesson that, now this person who was one of us is one of them. So what does that mean? What does that mean about us and them, that somebody who you love and care about can now be a part of this other group that you thought were so horrible? I mean, again, it has striking, glaring parallels in real life. But the last episode with Garth, you know, we see Sam and Dean, you know, holding the little werewolf babies and, you know, having dinner and they're dancing. You know, it's all very, hey, this is fine. So that was an interesting message. And I thought it was cool that they did it with Garth.
Yeah, or the fact that like when they were in the cages in season 15, when they lost all their luck and Garth still comes to save them, even though he's a werewolf. Like he doesn't let his friends, right? He doesn't let that friendship or that family bond that they developed as hunters disappear. So again, more of that gray. Like he knows what they are and he still loves them. I mean, it's one of his pubs after him, you know. So
yeah. And they do the same. They know what he is, but they still love him for who he is, not you know, the group that he now belongs to or whatever.
Yeah. Did we see any other werewolf clans over the course of the show, or groups before we move away from werewolves? Think about that. And if you come up with somebody, we'll come back to it. Because we also saw odd family-ish groupings of ghosts, or people who didn't want to be alone in the afterlife. We saw that with in Family Matters with the serial killer and the kids, and how there was almost a family of kids who, of course, were taken against their will, but remaining with that parental figure. Then we also saw the ghosts in the hotel where the hunter, Annie, and Ghost Bobby are helping Sam and Dean in the big old hotel. And there are all those ghosts that the patriarch won't let them leave. So whether or not they want to be part of the family, they can't leave. That's kind of a powerful, very scary sort of dynamic, totally unhealthy. But any thoughts about some of the ghost families we've seen?
In the Born Again Identity, was it Born Again Identity? I think when the girl, her brother, is saying, you know, kill yourself to be with me. And Sam has to burn the bracelet that he had made for her because his blood was on it. And that's the only way that he could get her away from her brother's ghost. So, so yeah, that happens more than once or twice, I think, in the show.
Yeah, Mannequin 3. Right, Mannequin 3, very similar. Like the sister had given a kidney to the other sister, so the ghost was sticking around because of that. And when she died, that's when the ghost disappeared.
It's interesting way it parallels, but it's such a big theme of supernatural with Sam and Dean. And I mean, literally, Sam and Dean can't live without each other. Dean certainly can't live without Sam. We learn that Sam reluctantly does live without Dean, but you get the feeling that he certainly didn't do it happily, even though he found some happiness. So, I mean, I think it's interesting the way the show takes that bond between Sam and Dean, which is what many of us are watching for and find so interesting about the show, but also from time to time try to show the dark side of that too. You know, it's not entirely yes, this is the most functional thing ever bond. That's part of what makes it so interesting. So I think they use these other parallels to like nudge that, hey, is this really okay? Is it really okay that Dean can't live without Sam? Because look what happens if you take it down this slippery slope. So I like the way they use that parallel. I think it makes the relationship between Sam and Dean even more interesting and unusual.
Mm-hmm. Now we've talked certainly about the heavenly dysfunction, but you know, we also got introduced to the Norse gods, and they weren't really rocking a healthy family dynamic either. When you looked at Odin and Loki and all of those. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on all of that? Since they spent most of the episode trying to kill each other.
Well, when Gabriel, loses his witness protection and goes after Loki's real children, that's when things get, pretty serious. But yeah, I mean, the gods in Hammer of the Gods, when you're talking about that episode, and they are kind of set up like family in a way, but Lucifer comes in and sort of disabuses all of them of that idea. You call yourselves gods and you're just petty little things. So there wasn't really a family bond, even though they were sort of set up that way. It's almost actually more like, I don't know, like the Rotary Club. That's what it felt like, that it was like some kind of a fraternal organization, but, they were no killing anyone and watch out for the local virgins kind of thing. So,
and we saw Odin and Prometheus's son as well, to throw another one out there.
yeah, Zeus, absolutely.
Zeus, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wrong pantheon.
I mean, the other, dark side that they're constantly exploring is, on the one side, you have Sam and Dean can't live without each other, but on the other hand, you have constant like siblings threatening to kill each other or actually killing each other, or will they or won't they kill each other, is the other theme that runs throughout the entire show from the very beginning. It turns out that's Chuck's whole goal in life is, can I get the Winchesters to kill each other? So it has a lot to say about how close sibling relationships are and family relationships are, but also how fraught they are. We started out with Travis, talking about, your sister or your sibling is maybe the person you know the best and trust the most, but it's also the person who can drive you the craziest and, you have the deepest issues with. So I think it uses that mirror throughout the show too. There are countless sibling pairs and sibling parallels that run throughout the entire show.
Even before, when we were kind of talking about before the gods, and we're talking about the brothers and how that was, and how difficult it was for Dean and Sam to kind of live on their own, and they would try, but Dean would always fail. And then I think about that last episode with Ash, when they're in heaven and they're kind of going around after the two hunters killed them, and the way Dean treats Sam. It's like, this is one of your happiest memories when you were without me and you had a dog, and how that makes Dean feel. And he's like, I can't help it that I enjoyed this moment. It wasn't despite not having you, it was just like, this moment was good in my life. And for a lot of people, and you kind of see this with the Thor and Odin and Loki episode, like when you meet the real Loki and he wants to go after Gabriel, he's like, listen, I didn't like my family, but I love my family too. So I'm going to kill Gabriel because I did love Odin. And it's his fault that he's dead, even though it was Lucifer that killed him.
And I think there's also a pervasive fan theory that the things that Sam and Dean were shown in that heaven were manipulated by Zachariah to drive them apart and weren't necessarily their all-time hits. Of course, we never get that conversation except in fan fiction, but knowing that they tampered with the voicemail, or someone tampered with the voicemail, I think that is a very solid theory that, yes, those were, like you said, moments that Sam was happy, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were his best moments. They were just moments.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have good moments in the middle of a bad stretch of things. I'm sorry, Lynn.
I know, I was just going to say, anything Zachariah is involved with, I think you can assume it was a manipulation of some kind.
Absolutely.
So as we come up to the end of our hour, did we miss any family groupings you've just been dying to talk about? Any comments? Lynn, you're nodding.
I just, because it's one of my favorite family relationships in the show, which is Crowley and Rowena, which is just, talk about fraught and talk about complicated. And yet, two characters, again, two amazing actors, Mark Shepard and Ruth Connell, so good, brought so much nuance to those that you really couldn't hate those characters, even though if you looked at a piece of paper and read what they did, even during the course of the show, you should loathe them, and yet we didn't. And I love that little glimpse that we got of vulnerability from Rowena, where she says, you know, I have to hate you because if I didn't hate you, I would love you. I wanted so much more of that. I thought that relationship was so fascinating and so nuanced and just so fraught that I really wanted more. But I love that they explored that. I mean, certainly parent-child relationships, just like sibling relationships, are a big theme of the show. And it played out in a very unique way with Crowley and Rowena.
Absolutely. And then you bring Gavin in, and then that added a whole other, you know, circumstance to where she ended up having him go back so that he would be killed. And I don't think Crowley ever quite forgave her for that.
Well, and Oscar.
You know.
Yeah.
And Oscar, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly.
And the second half of that quote where it's like, love is a weakness and I'll never be weak again.
Mhm.
Like you wonder what happened to her even before that caused all this. Like what type of trauma, what kind of issues, what type of abuse did Rowena go through that said, no, I have to close myself up. Vulnerability is a weakness. Love is a weakness. And then how that plays through the family dynamic exactly with Gavin. And then how she did find the weakness with Oscar and would still kind of like be there. And then how much it hurt her when she had to kill him. And how much that hurt Crowley that he even existed.
Yes,
What a great story. It's such a great story.
absolutely.
Oscar shows up in one episode and he's still so pivotal.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we have blown through our time, as it always works when we get into these conversations. But thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm going to let everybody say where we can find you online, starting with Susan.
Great. You can see us at Twitter. Women in Supernatural is, or at Women in Supernatural on Twitter. We are getting ready to have a new critical essays collection that we are getting ready to write. We want people to write for us, and you can find it at Women in SPN, all caps. So.
Okay, Travis.
You can find me writing for the series of books or pop culture psychology. I also have a Twitter that it's probably gonna be changing soon, so I'm gonna like leave that off because it's gonna be altered a little bit. So,
Okay.
yeah, and on panels like these because I love being able to talk to everybody about this fun show that I love so much.
Awesome. Lynn?
Find me on all social media at FangasmSPN, and you can find the books that I've written with the actors of Supernatural at the website peacewhenyouaredone.com.
I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. Social media is all a variation of those names. And of course, you can find me at the Winchester Family Business blog, but you can also find me here on Continual. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. And thanks to everybody for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon. So we'll see you online.